Okay, so welcome everyone. Week 7, lecture 2. Am I correct? Yes, week 7, lecture 2. So after today, we've got just 2 more weeks of lectures to go. And that's the term. Why? It's been really, really quick. There's not much happening in terms of logistics. I mean, there's your lab 5 is out, which would be due next Tuesday. The assignment consults are going on. I hope you're all making good progress on the assignment. Anyone finished yet from those who are here? But hopefully you're getting close, right? And hopefully once you implement the whole thing and get it going, hopefully you find it satisfying that you were able to actually implement a albeit a simplified version, but a fairly realistic chatting application, right? What else? The midterm marks have already been out. We are still making a few updates, so I'll wait for a couple more days and then rerun the statistics and update the statistics, because there have been a few updates to the marks. So by end of week, I'll update the stats for the whole class. In terms of the final, I think the date has come out. It is on the 6th of December, if I remember correctly, which is a Monday. And it is in the afternoon from 1:45 to 4 p.m. So basically 2 to 4 p.m. with some extra time for, you get some extra reading time on the final exam. But I'll put up, so this page here, similar to the midterm, I'll populate it with all the information next week. Other than that, I can't think of any logistics. So let's just jump right into the content. So you may recall we've been looking at the routing protocols. So after a general introduction, we started by looking at link state routing, which if you may recall, each node creates a link state packet, which is essentially information about its direct links, the direct links and the neighbors that it's connected to. And then this link state packet is broadcast to the entire network, and every node does this. So eventually, after a bit of time, after the link state have been propagated, each node will have a global topology, and the global topology will of course be the same at each and every node. And then each node can independently run Dijkstra's algorithm, as we saw, to determine the shortest path, the least cost path, I should say, least cost path to every destination. And at the end, this would, each node would then populate that forwarding table that we saw. So that's one approach, which is centralized, where each node has the global topology. This other approach, called distance vector, is radically different. This is a approach where the nodes do not actually have the entire topology. So I think when you're looking through these examples, try to think of it from that perspective, because when you see a network, right, we as humans, we can see the entire topology. So it can sometimes be a little hard for us to understand how distance vector is actually working, because each node, remember that each node does not have that whole global view, right? Each node only has information about its direct neighbors. And based on that information, you'll see how each node can then arrive at an estimate of the least cost path to every destination. And iteratively, you'll see that eventually this converges. So the basic principle that it's actually based on is fairly straightforward. So this is called Bellman-Ford equation. It's something that comes from dynamic programming, named after these two gentlemen. The idea here is that if you're trying to figure out the least cost path from, say, some node X to some node Y, you basically look at all the neighbors of X. So which here, for example, let's say we are using the variable V, to denote a neighbor of X. And we assume that we know the distance from V to get to the destination Y, right? And of course, the node itself, X, knows the cost of the direct link that connects it to V, and it knows the cost from V to Y. So it can do the addition that will give it the cost of getting to Y by going through node V, right? And now, of course, each node may have multiple multiple neighbors. So you do this for each neighbor, you do this computation for each neighbor. And at that point, X would know that, okay, from its set of neighbors, these are the costs to get to the destination Y. And then you simply go with the minimum from that particular set. So then that becomes the current estimate of the cost from X to Y, right? So the key point here is you're relying on information that you're receiving from your neighbor. And then, of course, this information the node already has. So it's using those two pieces of information to arrive at this. So let me first illustrate a simple example here. This is just capturing one snapshot, and I'll walk you through sort of little more evolved example later. So let's say we are focused on node U as shown here in the picture. You notice node U has three neighbors, three direct neighbors, V, W, and X. So assume for now that V has a cost, and let's say we are trying to figure out the cost to this particular destination, right? And let's say the cost from V to Z is 5, right? Don't worry right now how that number was derived. Let's just assume V knows that, and V has passed this information on to U. Similarly, let's say X has a least cost path to Z with a cost of 3. So this information is again passed on to U by X. And W has a least cost path to Z with a cost of 3. And that information is also known to U, right? Because these are U's direct neighbors. So this is sort of showing you a practical example of how Bellman-Ford equation is actually applied. So you look at each neighbor, we know the cost to each neighbor. So for example, the cost from U to V is 2. dVz is 5. So 2 plus 5 is the cost to go through V, right? In order to reach Z. Then we have 1 plus 3, which is the cost to go through X to reach Z. And then we have 5. This is the direct cost here, 5 plus 3, which is 8, right? So then we look at the lowest one, and that essentially becomes the current estimate of the cost from of the path from U to Z. So this is the current estimate of the least cost path from U to Z based on the information that U has received from its neighbors. Now, if any of this changes, right? Now, assuming, of course, in these examples, we'll assume the link costs don't change. We'll look at the implications of that a little later. For now, assume the link costs are static. So if any of these changes, then this has to be rerun, right? To come up with a new estimate if required. If not, this is the final endpoint essentially, right? Okay. So that was one snapshot. So how does all of this work as a whole? So what happens is, as you'll see, based on certain conditions, each node will send its own distance vector estimate to neighbors. And when X receives the distance vector estimates from any neighbor, it updates its own distance vector using this equation. Now, mind you, it's not necessary that each update will result in a change in the final answer, right? Because, for example, in this, again, I'm just making things up. Imagine this had changed to 4, right? So in this equation, this would change to 4, right? But still the minimum cost in this case would still be this, because 2 plus 4 is still greater than 1 plus 3, right? So it's not necessary that when any of this changes that this also has to change, right? It really depends on how the costs actually pan out. But regardless, if a node gets an updated information from one of its neighbors, it certainly has to recompute this, right, to determine whether a change has happened or not, right? So that's it's kind of fairly simple if you think about it, right? That's all that needs to be done, and then as you'll see, eventually this will lead to convergence, right? So of course, as you may kind of appreciate, initially the nodes would not have the least cost paths. They would sort of use some paths which may not necessarily be the best paths, but eventually they learn as they keep getting updated information from their neighbors. So that's the reason it's a sort of iterative process, and it can take a little while for the nodes to arrive at the correct estimates. So what each node essentially does here is it waits for a new distance vector. So this information that's sent from one node to another is referred to as the distance vector. So it's basically each node saying, hey, these are my current estimates to get to every other node. I'm going to send this information, which is called a distance vector, to my neighbors. So when a particular node receives these distance vectors from its neighbors, it can then rerun the Bellman-Ford algorithm for each destination locally. So a node waits for either to receive a new distance vector from its neighbors, which implies it's new information, updated information that's being received, or if the actual link cost itself changed, right? Because sometimes, it depends on how dynamic the costs are. And as we kind of discussed last week, it's not very typical to have constantly varying costs. Particularly here with distance vector, you'll see that if costs keep changing all the time, it will take forever for the network to actually converge, right? So in most cases, costs are not sort of changing all the time, but there may be certain instances where you might need to change a cost, right? So if that happens, then the nodes that are connected to that link, say if this changed from 2 to 3, these two nodes would detect that, and then they would also have to rerun the distance vector algorithm, right? So then the node will recompute its own distance vector based on the new information that's received. Then it checks if the values in the vector have changed from what they were before. Only if there's a change does this node notify the neighbors. By notify the neighbors, we mean it sends this new distance vector to its direct neighbors. And then it basically goes back and waits, right? So eventually, you'll see that the network actually converges, and once the network has converged, there are no distance vectors being exchanged between nodes. And at that point, the routes have stabilized. All the forwarding tables are stable at that point. So this is sort of iterative, and it is also asynchronous. It's not necessary that all nodes are kind of executing this precisely at the same time, right? Because nodes will execute this as and when they receive the distance vector updates, and if they also notice any changes in the link costs, right? It's also completely distributed. So there's no sort of central entity here. And in fact, you'll see that the nodes are also not knowing the entire topology, because all they're getting is distance vectors from the neighbors, and based on that, their sole focus is to find the least cost path to every destination. Their focus is not to determine the actual topology of the network. Okay. And it's self-stopping in that, as noted here, the only reason to recompute the distance vector would either be if there's a change in the link cost or if a new distance vector is received, right? So if a node itself has converged, which means its distance vector is no longer changing, there is no need for this node to send any updated distance vectors to its neighbors, right? And eventually that neighbor will also converge, and then that neighbor's other neighbors will converge. So it sort of propagates through the whole network, right? So slowly the whole network converges, and at that point, nothing is happening. No actions are needed to be taken. All the routers essentially in their code execution would simply be waiting at this point for potential updates. So let me walk you a little bit. I'm not going to show you a full example here, but I'll walk you through a couple of steps, right? Because once you get the idea, it's kind of fairly intuitive how this is working. So here I'm showing you a fairly large topology, 9 nodes, as you see here. And this is showing you the initial state of the distance vector at node A, right? So when you start off, of course, a node would only know about its direct links and direct neighbors, right? So this is how you initialize the distance vector, right? So notice here, the distance from A to B is 8. The distance from A to D is 1. Distance from A to A is, of course, 0. That's kind of meaningless, or distance to itself. And then for all the other nodes, we don't have any information, right? At that point. You'll also notice that at this point, if you, again, remember the node does not have a global view. So A does not see this topology. A only sees its direct links, right? Be very clear about that A does not see this, right? We as humans can see this entire topology, and we can see that this is actually not the least cost path. There is a shorter path if you go this way, right? Shorter, by shorter, I mean a lower cost path. 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, right? However, this node has not yet discovered that path because it doesn't have this information that it will eventually receive from its neighbors to be able to determine this. So at this stage, this path is unknown, right? So that's the reason the current estimate is 8. And as you'll see with time, this will evolve to the correct cost. You'll also notice there's some asymmetries here in the network itself, right? Okay, so I've only shown you the initial vector at A, but you could also imagine B, C, every other node will have a similar initial vector, which will only contain information about its direct neighbors. So for example, B will have 3 entries, right? DBA would be 8, DBC would be 1, DBE would be 1, DBB would of course be 0, and then the others would be unknown. It's common practice when you don't know a cost to just assume it to be infinity. That's the common notation in distance vector. Okay, so each node will now send this initial distance vector to their immediate neighbors. Now remember, this is only sent to immediate neighbors. Okay, so A's distance vector is not propagated by D to G. That never happens, neither from D to E. The distance vectors are only sent to one-hop neighbors, and we stop there. Okay. Okay. So imagine that in the next time step, here we are. In this case, we are sort of assuming all nodes are executing the distance vector algorithm at the same time. It need not be the case in practice, but this just sort of simplifies the explanation, right? Because a node would kind of execute it based on when it receives the distance vector. Though even in a practical setting, you can imagine that these updates may sort of arrive roughly close to each other. They're not going to be like minutes apart or something like that, right? So typically you would still see these being executed at roughly the same time. Maybe not exactly, but roughly at the same time, right? So let's say at time t = 1, each node has now received this initial distance vector from its neighbors. So once they do that, the nodes will compute their new local distance vector using the Bellman-Ford equation. I will show you an example in just a minute. I'm just giving you the big picture right now. And then the nodes, assuming in this first instance, it is very likely that the node's distance vector would have updated because they still haven't figured out paths to many other nodes. So in this example, it's very, very, very likely that each node will now send its updated distance vector to their neighbors because their vectors have changed, right? So imagine in the next time instance, all these new revised distance vectors arrive at each node. each node will now recompute the paths. And you're seeing those, yeah, basically that's what's being shown. The costs are also changing there, as you saw, and so on and so forth, basically. So that's basically how it all works. And you iterate this, and eventually you'll see that the network converges. So now let's look at the actual computation that happens, right? I just gave you the big picture there. Now let's go back to that first step, the initialization phase, and let's see how the computation is actually executed. So here we are going to focus on node B. Given it's a large network, I mean, it will take me the whole lecture just to sort of walk you through this example. So I'll just show you a couple of snapshots here. So let's say B has this is B's initial distance vector, and as you would expect, it only has information about its direct neighbors, 8, 1, and 1. The others are all unknown. And imagine B has received the distance vector from A, it has received the distance vector from C, it has received the distance vector from E, right? So those are the initial distance vectors at each of these neighbors, right? And B has received this new information. B, of course, knows the direct costs to each of these neighbors. So based on that, B will now execute the Bellman-Ford equation, right? So it's going to, you'll see 8 equations, 8 or 7, sorry, equations being formulated here. Basically, you're trying to figure out the least cost path to every destination, right? So let's start with A. Again, here for each of these, you'll have 3 choices based on information received from the 3 neighbors and based on the costs known to each neighbor, right? So remember, here we are not using any information from the previous distance vector. We are simply looking at the information received from the neighbors and re-executing Bellman-Ford's equation, right? So CBA, so that's this, the distance from B to A plus the distance from A to A, which is obviously 0. So this is 8 plus 0, right? BC is 1, okay? Does C have a cost to A yet? No, DCA is unknown. So 1 plus infinity is basically infinity, it's unknown, right? So the path through C is unknown. The path through E will also be unknown in this case because E hasn't yet discovered a path to A, right? So this is fairly simple. This stays at 8. B to C. This again, A won't have a path to C yet. So infinity plus 8 is basically infinity. What is this? C. Okay, so the cost to C is 1, and of course the cost from C to C is going to be 0. So this second one will be 1. And then E also hasn't yet found a path to C. So 1 plus infinity will still be infinity. So that stays at 1. Now, how about the cost to D? Now, again, remember, B doesn't know necessarily which node D is connected to, right? So please keep that in mind. Again, we as humans, we can see the entire topology if you go back a few slides. But if you think of that you're sitting inside B, right? Think of it in that way, and you only have this local view, right? So B doesn't actually know precisely where D is. It's just computing the path to D based on what its neighbors are telling it, right? So A has told B that it can get to D with a cost of 1. Okay, 1 plus 8 is 9. So that's why this first one here is 9. Okay. C has told, E has told B that it can get to D with a cost of 1. B's cost to E is 1. So 1 plus 1 will give us 2. And then C, of course, doesn't have a cost to D yet. So that stays infinity, right? So based on this information, the current estimate for B to get to D will be 2, right? B to E is 1. That's just the straightforward path. Neither A nor C yet have a path to E. So that's straightforward. F, well, again, remember, B doesn't know where F is. It's not its direct neighbor. but one of the neighbors has told it that it can reach f with a cost of 1. So that's E. So 1 plus 1 is 2. The other two neighbors don't yet have a path to E, right? So that's the reason these are unknown. This is 2, so this now becomes 2. G is still unknown. None of the neighbors have a path yet. H, there is a path through B. Oh no, sorry, which node? Oh yeah, this one, E. E. E has a path to H with a cost of 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2, right? And I is still unknown, right? So this is what B would run. And you'll notice now B's distance vector has indeed changed from before. So this is now the new distance vector for B. Let me put it in the same format. So you see there's a clear change, right? Some paths that were not known have now become known. None of the known paths are still the same. Eventually you may realize that this will change at some point, but right now it hasn't, right? But in any case, the distance vector for B has now changed, which means after this computation, B will then send this new distance vector to its neighbors, right? Let me show you one more example. So this is, again, remember, this is still at time 1. So this here we are now focusing on node C. So just like we focused on node B, now we are focusing on node C. And note here, we are still using the previous distance vector of B, right? So this what I'm showing you on this slide is run at the same time as what I showed you on this slide, right? So the updated vector from B has not yet reached C. So that's why we are using the first vector, the original vector that was sent by B. So because this is exactly at the same time, right? So C will do exactly the same thing. This was C's distance vector. Now, in this case, C only has one neighbor. So the calculation is a little more simpler here. We only need to look at information from the direct neighbor B, right? And C's cost to B is 1. So basically, you add 1 to all of these costs. And yeah, that's basically the distance vector. So 1 plus 8 becomes 9. 1 plus 0 is 1. This is unknown. 1 plus 1 is 2, and so on and so forth, right? So you'll notice now again, C's vector also changes compared to what it was, right? So what has changed? Well, we now have a path to D, as you see here, and we now have a path to A, right? So those two have changed, right? Which would mean C will now, in the next iteration, will send the updated distance vector to B, right? And so on and so forth. This is showing you, actually this is asking you how E would have computed the distance vector. I'm not actually going to show you on this slide, but as an exercise, you may want to try that just to get a feel for how this works, right? The concept still remains the same. In this case, notice E has 4 neighbors. So you will have to look at distance vectors from 4 nodes. This was E's original vector. These are the 4 vectors it received from its neighbors, right? And so on and so forth. So again, I'm not going to walk you through the entire example. And again, in the exam, I'm not going to ask you to run through a full example because that would just take you forever. I might ask you to elaborate what's happening at one time slot or something like that, right? Because clearly manually doing this can take quite a lot of time. So how does this whole iterative, why does this sort of converge if you think about it, right? So let's focus on node C for now and C's information as it propagates through. So the C's state essentially is only known to C initially, right? Then C sends its updated vector to B, and then B uses that updated vector to recompute its own distance vector. So which means the influence of C has been manifested at B, basically in one time slot, right, if you may. And then that information will then whatever B has updated will get propagated to B's neighbors one time slot after that, if you may. Again, I'm simplifying this a little bit by saying things work in slots. Strictly speaking, they don't, but we kind of make that simplifying assumption here. So by t equals to C's C's vector information would have manifested its impact on the distance vectors that are 2 hops away, right? So that would mean A and E at that point. When A and E send their updated vectors to their neighbors, which would be D, H, and F, they would then see any changes that may be manifested as a result of that original distance vector from C, and so on and so forth. And eventually that information, that influence will reach to the entire network, right? So that's how this sort of information gets diffused. And that's how the paths get eventually found out, right? So if you look at, for example, this path here, right? This is a 3-hop path. So it will take about 3 of these iterations before this path is actually discovered for that information to get propagated, right? So E will, for example, figure out this path when it receives information from D that there is a path with a cost 2 to A. E will then inform B about that, and B will say, hey, I can get to E with 1, 1 plus 2 is 3. So it will then figure out that this is a shorter path than this, right? But for that to happen, this information has to get propagated, right? Which takes a little while. But eventually it will sort of be able to figure that out, right? Okay, so are there any questions on the basic workings of distance vector? You may also wish to sort of come up with a smaller topology and work through that. As an example, this is a fairly large topology to work through, but you could come up with, say, maybe just a subset, like just use 4 nodes and sort of try yourself to walk through this, right? Okay, so now let's, if there's no questions, let's keep moving forward. So there can be some convergence issues with distance vector, primarily because nodes do not have the global topology and they're relying on this information from their neighbors, right? So it can take a little bit of time for the routes to converge, right? And what do we mean by convergence, really? If you were asking me to describe it, well, it's the time, as it says here, the time by which all the routers have sort of agreed on what are the best paths in the entire network, right? And as a result of this, if there are any changes in the topology, which we kind of also saw with link state, there'll be a period of uncertainty essentially while this updated information gets propagated through the network. And this can actually take a little longer with distance vector because of the way it works, right? Because as you saw in link state, once a link cost changes, a revised link state broadcast happens, right? Basically the node, the updated link states are then broadcast through the entire network. Once each node gets the updated topology, they will then centrally just execute Dijkstra's algorithm, right? So the time to converge tends to be much faster with link state, whereas here the nodes that detect the changes will update their vectors, then they will send these vectors to their neighbors, they will sort of manifest those updates, then those neighbors will send it to their neighbors. So for a large network, it can take quite some time for the entire network to converge if there have been any changes, right? Okay, there's a question. If we have a topology as large as the internet, then each router should store a lot of information about the cost to the destinations in the entire network. Okay, that's a good question, Joseph. I may quickly go, oh, not this slide. Yeah. I briefly mentioned this, but maybe I'll do it again. So remember that, yeah, we are using a graph abstraction. Now, obviously, we cannot abstract the entire internet using one graph. So normally how routing protocols work are as shown here. So you would have different autonomous systems, right? And then within each autonomous system, you would run one instantiation of a routing protocol. So imagine, for example, you could be running distance vector here, distance vector here. It's not necessary all of these have to be same. This network might be running link state or whatever, right? So the actual graph, essentially, if you were to abstract the graph, I mean, it probably will be larger than that 8-9 node network I showed you, but it's not going to be thousands of routers, right? Because we are basically looking at this. And then if you even look at these border routers, again, each border router is again not connected to millions of other autonomous systems. It's going to be connected to a handful of autonomous systems, right? So having this sort of network of networks allows the state information that you need to maintain to be fairly reasonable. It's not, we are talking of order of tens of nodes rather than thousands or millions of nodes, right? So that's the reason this scales. Now, of course, in our discussions, we kind of just assume a single graph, but remember, by one graph here, we are really meaning, say, one autonomous system, right? Not the entire internet, if you may. Where was I? Here. The questions. Okay, no. Okay, so yeah, so let's talk a little bit about convergence. And there is this particular peculiarity with our distance vector where, as I'll show you in a couple of examples, these algorithms are known to react rapidly to what's referred to as good news. By good news here, I mean a reduction in the link cost, but they take a lot of time to converge when there's sometimes an increase in the link cost, right? So let me walk you through an example. Now, one caveat here, to demonstrate this, I have to use a very small network. If not, it will take me, and it will get already, I mean, you'll see even with this small example, it already gets fairly complicated, right? So bear with me. I mean, this is a fairly trivial example. It's just 3 nodes. As you see, they're connected in a triangle. But let's just stick to that because as you'll see, this already starts getting a little complicated. Right? I'm going to use a slightly different notation to do the distance vector computations. So these tables look slightly different. The yellow entries effectively are the distance vectors. So the way I've structured this is I'm showing you what's happening at node A. Node A is computing the distance vector to the other destinations. B and C, we do not show the cost to itself because that is 0. That's kind of meaningless anyway. And then these are the neighbors, basically. A has 2 neighbors, right? B and C. So here in these columns, you'll see the cost to get to each destination via each neighbor. Now, again, as I said, this network is so small that you have 2 neighbors and 2 destinations. So, but the instance I increase this, it would have become much more difficult to explain this. So yeah, just bear with me there. So you'll notice here I'm referring to as a stable state. So imagine the network has now converged based on this topology. So the least cost path from A to B is this direct path of 4. A to C is 4 plus 1, 5, right, via B. For B, it's 4 and 1. These are the direct links that you see here. For C, it's 5, 1 plus 4. So C to A is via 5. And C to B is, of course, the direct link via B. So that's one. So these yellow entries, so this is the distance vector for A, That's the distance vector for B, and that's the distance vector for C. Yeah, that's just a note that B and C is B's shortest paths are basically the direct paths, right? Okay, so this is where the network has stabilized. And now let's say the cost of that link that you see here has changed from 4 to 1, right? And the assumption being that both A and B can detect this cost change, and they know that this cost has reduced by 3, right? So what do A and B do? Well, they go to the respective column here. In this case, it's going to be, for A, it's going to be all the costs via B will now reduce by 3, right? Because this link cost has reduced from 4 to 1. So you'll notice the entries in that column are simply decremented by the difference 4 minus 1, which is 3. So 4 minus 1 becomes, 4 minus 3 becomes 1, and 5 minus 3 becomes 2. Right? The next, C also does the same thing. Sorry, not C, B, right? Because this is the link. So B, in the case of B, you'll notice it's this column now, right? The column of via A, which is decremented. So 4 minus 3 becomes 1, 9 minus 3 becomes 6, right? Now, one thing you'll notice is in the context of A, B, so of course the distance vectors for both A and B will change instantly. So you'll notice the original vector was 4 and 5. It has now become 1 and 2. For B, the original vector was 4 and 1. Now it becomes 1 and 1, right? So what do A and B now do? Of course, C hasn't yet detected this. C cannot see, C is not connected to this link. So C at this stage doesn't know of any changes, right? So C basically remains as is. However, since A and B have changed their distance vectors from 4, 5 and 1, 2 to 4, 1 and 1, 1, A and B will have to send this updated distance vector to their neighbors. So let's see what happens when A now sends this updated vector of 1, 2 to its neighbors B and C, right? A is connected to both B and C, so they will receive this updated vector. So in this instance, from node B's perspective, we really only need to focus on this column because A is sending us new information. So based on that, potentially information here may change. Nothing should change here because C hasn't sent us anything at this stage. A has sent us this new distance vector, right? So now this, of course, doesn't change. B to A via A is the direct cost. So that never changes. That stays at 1. However, A is now telling B that it can reach C with a cost of 2. B knows that its cost to A is 1. So 1 plus 2 becomes 3 here, right? So this value changes as you'll notice. Okay. So you'll notice that at this point, B's distance vector still remains the same, right? It was originally 1, 1. It still remains 1, 1. So even though this cost has changed, that doesn't impact the actual distance vector. That stays as 1, 1. How about C, right? So A also sends this updated distance vector to C because C is its neighbor. And again, here we need to just focus on this column, okay? So what do we have now? C to A is 50, right? C knows that its own cost to A is 50. And of course, this is the direct cost. So this never changes. C to A via A remains 50. That's the direct cost. A has told C that it can reach B with a cost of 1. Okay. 1 plus 50 is 51. So that's the reason this now becomes 51 here, right? Again, notice this hasn't changed the distance vector for C, right? So by receiving this update from A, B and certain information has changed at B and C, but it hasn't actually changed the distance vectors at those two nodes. I'll come back to that question from you, Joseph, in just a minute. I think you have raised a good point, which I will come back to a little later. Let me just walk through this example. So this was what happened when A sent its distance vector to B and C. Remember, B also needs to send its distance vector, the original one, right? Which luckily here still is just 1, 1. So B is now, remember, B has also sent this vector to A and C. So let's now look at what happens at A and C. So in this case, again, we just focus on this column because A is receiving this new information from B. This doesn't change. A to B via B is just the direct link. So that remains at 1. B is telling A that it can reach C with a cost of 1. A knows its cost to B is 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2. So that's the reason this stays at 2, right? So again, here, no change, all good. How about C? So B sends this vector 1, 1 to C. So now we focus on this column. So C to B via B doesn't change. That's the direct link here. That stays at 1. B is telling C it can go to A with a cost of 1. C's cost to B is 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Right? So that changes as you notice here. Okay, sorry, here. It was originally 5. This now became 2. So we do have a change in the distance vector at C. Okay, nothing changed at A. However, the vector at C has changed, which means C will now send this updated vector of 2, 1 to its neighbors A and B. I won't go through A here, but basically nothing changes at A. For B, you'll notice that again here we need to focus on this 2 columns, right? So nothing changes here. At node B, this one doesn't change because that's the direct link. But notice that C is telling B it can get to A with a cost of 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. So this now becomes 3. However, that doesn't change the distance vector. So at this point, the network has converged. Okay, there are no further updates necessary because the distance vector at every node has now converged. So there is no further updates to be done. The paths are correct. Everyone is happy, right? So no problems here. Okay. Again, I'll come to this question Joseph has raised in after I go through this whole slide set. So just hold on. So this was when the cost has reduced. Okay. So that's what's referred to as good news because it's a reduction in cost, right? So savings, sort of. That's how it's interpreted. Now let's look at the same network, but what happens if the cost increases? Okay. So what happens if this cost, say, instead of going to 1, it now increases to 60, right? So now the difference is 56. It's an increase of 56, right? And again, A and B detect this. So we do exactly the same thing. We go to the appropriate columns here for A and B, because those are the 2 nodes that discover this, and increase the values there by 56 because that's the change in these costs, right? So this becomes 4 plus 56, 65 plus 56, 61, and so on and so forth, right? So you'll notice that as a result, the distance vectors will now change. So the original distance vector was 4, 5, right? But due to a change, those 2 values via B now became 60 and 61. However, the way we compute the distance vector is for each row, we look at the one that has the least value, right? So of course, in this case, it's going to be 51. In this case, it's going to be 50. So you'll notice the distance vector, the yellow ones, have now changed here to 5150. So that's the new distance vector at A. The distance vector also changes here. So this originally was 4, 1. But this has now increased to 60, and 6 is of course lower than 60. So this is now the new distance vector at B, right? C, of course, hasn't yet detected this change, so this C remains as is, but this means both A and B now need to send their vectors to B and C. So let's see what happens when A sends this vector to B and C. So again, we focus on, in this case, we focus on this column because we are receiving information from A. The cost from B to A via A is this direct link. So that stays at 60. That's the direct link, obviously. A is telling B it can get to C with a cost of 50. B's cost to A is 60. 60 plus 50 gives us 110. So that's why that becomes 110. Okay. But that doesn't change the distance vector for B. So that's all okay here. Now, how about at C, right? So again, here we receive new information from A. So we focus on that column. C to A via A is the direct link that stays at 50. A is telling C that it can reach, the direct cost from C to A is 50, right? A is telling C that it can reach B with the cost of 51. As you see here, 51 plus 50 gives us 101, right? So that's why this changes to 101. However, this distance vector still remains at 51, right? So no changes in the distance vector for B and C when they receive the information from A. Now remember, B has also sent this distance vector 61 to A and C. So now we focus on B here. You'll notice that nothing changes here for B. So I'll not walk you through that. That's fairly straightforward. Let's focus on C, right? So C has received this new information from B. This doesn't change. C to B via B is this direct link that stays at 1. But B is telling C it can get to A with a cost of 6. The link from C to B is 1. So 1 plus 6 is 7. Okay, so you'll notice this has now changed from 5-1 to 7-1, right? So this distance vector is now changed, which means B's updated vector now needs to get sent to A and B. You'll notice no change at A. Again, I'll let you run through that. But if you focus on this column, basically, right, the new information that was received from C, which is 7-1, this won't change. That's the direct link. But if C can get to B with a cost of 7 and B to C is 1, so this now becomes 8. Hopefully, you're starting to see a pattern here. Let me just erase my annotations because there's an animation here. That will just help. Okay, I think that should do. So if you look at what's happening, you'll notice this cost was 5 originally, right? Which was the C to A via B. So that was the original cost of 5, right? You notice that cost actually is no longer valid if you think about it, right? That was the previous cost, C to A along this path, 1 plus 4, 5, right? But somehow that has now been carried forward, right? So this old cost that C had to A has now been retained. And based on that, B thinks it can somehow get to A with a cost of 6. Now notice this path doesn't actually exist in this new topology. This path, there is no such path anymore, right? Now this path somehow gets relayed to C. C thinks, okay, B has some magical path, which gets it to A with a cost of 6. I can get to B with a cost of 1. So my cost now becomes 7. It sends that back to B. B says, hey, C gets to A with a cost of 7, I get to C with a cost of 1, 1 plus 7 is 8. And this will keep happening essentially. So this C will now, on receiving this new information, this would change to 9. This 9 gets sent to B, B changes it to 10, 11, and this basically keeps happening till eventually they will actually discover the correct path, right? What is the correct cost? Let me ask you. What should be the correct cost for this and for this based on this new topology? Anyone? What should be B's cost to A? Yeah, 51 and 50, right? B's, if you look at this new picture, B's cost to A should be 1 plus 50, right? So this should be 51. And C's cost to A should be 50, right? That's just this direct link that you see here. So it will take about around 40 iterations, because you're starting at roughly 6. So, sorry, 45 iterations basically before B will actually converge to that and before C will converge to that, right? So it basically takes a lot of time for this convergence to happen, right? And imagine if this is only 56. What if this was increased to 600? Then you would need 590, whatever, 550 iterations for this to converge, right? So we clearly have a problem here, and there is one fundamental reason for this problem, and that goes back to the question raised by Joseph earlier, right? That this is creating loops basically. If you go back, forget this whole link cost change. Even if you forget the link cost change, and if you go back to the stable topology here, as Joseph asked, what is this cost 6, right? So you see that this is actually a problem because this is a loop, right? Where do you get this cost 6? Well, it's B, it's the cost from B to A, right? Via C. So this path doesn't actually exist. It's a loop. It's basically this path and then a path that goes back like that, right? So this is not actually a valid path. We do not consider loops to be valid, right? What has happened is the path from C to A is 5. There's no doubt about that, right? That is a correct path. 1 plus 4, 5, right? C has told B that it can get to A with a cost of 5. Now B doesn't necessarily know this is the path. This path actually passes through B, right? So from B's perspective, it only says that, hey, C has told me it can get to A with a cost of 5. My cost to C is 1. So 1 plus 5 becomes 6, right? That's how distance vector works. But clearly this is a problem because this is a loop, right? Similarly, I'll leave it to you to figure out, but this is also a loop. There is no actual valid path of 9, right? This is also a loop, basically. Think about it, B to C via A, right? So this is the same thing. This is going this way and then coming back this way, right? 4 plus 4 plus 1, 9, right? So this is again a problem, right? We don't, because of these loops and because the nodes do not have the complete topology, each node basically just believes whatever information it's been told without actually knowing that that path may go through itself, right? Here, the problem is happening at B because these paths are going through B and B doesn't know of those loops. So that's why you notice here, these are the problems. And these loops are persisting. Basically, we are using this prior information before the link cost change, and that's getting basically pushed through and propagated, and it takes quite a bit of time for the nodes to actually converge to the correct topology. So this in networking terms is referred to as counting to infinity, because literally this could take you forever, right? If this cost had increased by a huge increment, then it would take you basically till infinity to actually converge, right? So this is referred to as the count to infinity problem. So the question is, how do we solve this problem, right? So maybe this might be a good point to take a break. So let's take a short break, and then I'll come back and show you one way to potentially solve this problem. And I'll also show you that this does not always solve this problem. So yeah, let's take a short break, have a bit of a walk. I'll also show you the meme for today. I did line it up. So this is a meme about IP. So yeah, have a quick break, and then I'll see you in 5 minutes. Yeah, William, I agree. This is a bit confusing, right? I mean, that's why I'm going as slow as I can, trying to be as precise as I can. But yeah, I'll see you after the break. Okay, we're rolling. So how do we solve this count to infinity problem, right? So one way to solve this problem is basically to try to avoid those loops from happening. So this is a heuristic. This is what's called Poisson reverse, because as you'll see, the way this works is nodes actually are hiding their paths and not revealing their paths to their neighbors under certain circumstances to avoid those loops, basically, right? So the way this works is, again, this can be a bit of a tongue twister. So if B routes via C to get to A, B tells C that B's distance to A is infinite. Basically, it tells A that it doesn't have a path. Sorry, it tells C it doesn't have a path to A. What I mean by this is it does not reveal that path, right? So this avoids basically that loop from happening, right? So C won't be able to route to A via B, because if B doesn't tell C that it has a path to A, C knows that even though C can get to B, it thinks B cannot get to A. So C would never learn of that path to A via B, right? So let me show you some examples using that same network we had, right? So let's imagine we are here, right, in that stable state. So notice the distance vector for B is 4 and for A is 4 and 5. So now you'll see that A actually sends different versions of this distance vector to its neighbors, right? So the correct distance vector is of course 4 and 5. But if you look at the paths, you'll notice that if you look at A's path to A's path to B is of course this direct path, and A's path to C is this one, right? 4 plus 1, 5. So what information is A actually sending to B? It's what you see there. In fact, I should change this. Let me change it while I forgot to update this. Just give me a quick minute. I'll do a live update. Oh, sorry, wrong slides. This one. So in fact, yeah, that should be how it is. I'll explain. Okay. So the correct distance vector for A is 4, 5. But if you look at the put B, sort of look at the paths, right? So the path, the path from A to B is of course this direct path, but then the path from A to C is this, right? So you'll notice both these paths are effectively through B, right? The path from A to B is of course this direct path, but technically it is still through B. And the path from A to C is of course through B this way. So when A sends its distance vector to B, A will basically not reveal either of those paths. So you notice the distance vector sent from A to B is basically empty. A is telling B, I don't have any paths to any destinations, right? Because both these paths are using B to get to those destinations, right? And how about the paths from A to C? So let's look at what A should send to C. And so in fact, here you'll notice that none of these paths are going through C, right? So the path from, as we saw, the paths are 4 and 5 this way. They are both through B. So none of the paths are going through C. So actually A can reveal the correct distance vector to C. So actually this should not be infinity. So let me again update that. I had noticed that I just forgot to make that update. Sorry about that. Maybe doing it live is actually good. So this should go away. Yeah, okay. Now we are spot on. Yep. So A can send the accurate distance vector to C because none of those paths are actually going through C. Whereas when A sends the distance vector to B, you'll notice that it's actually lying. It's not revealing those paths. And C does the same thing, in fact, right? So if you look at C's distance vector, it's 5, 1. So what are those paths? So the path of 1 is this, C to B is 1. And then C to A is this one, 4 plus 1 is 5, right? So both these paths are going through B. So just like A, C will not reveal either of those paths to B. So C is basically saying, sending a blank distance vector to B, saying it doesn't have any paths to any destination. However, it will pass on the correct distance vector to A because none of these paths are going through A. So there's no issue of loops being created due to this, right? So based on this new information, you'll see that this is how the things will map out here. So you'll notice that the loops from B have completely gone at this stage, right? So B has not been told of any information basically. B received a blank distance vector from A. B also received a blank distance vector from C. So B is basically just relying on its direct paths, right? 4 and 1. So these entries are not in existence, and hence there are no loops as we saw earlier, right? And you'll see this will help a lot because if you don't have loops, then you don't run into that count to infinity problem. So again, going back to that same example, so imagine this increased to 60, right? This is what the initial state was. So as before, we increase these costs by 56. In this case, those won't exist, of course, they weren't there before. So this distance vector now changes, 5150, that changes to 61. This, of course, doesn't change yet. And then this distance vector is now sent to the neighbors B and C. So in this case, this cost is, of course, the direct cost that stays at 60. So this is 60 plus 50 becomes 110. You'll see here. So this doesn't change B's distance vector. This becomes, this doesn't, C won't receive that information actually. So that doesn't exist. This, that would be basically not told to C. So there's no, this route won't exist at that point. And similarly, B would send this distance vector 60 and 1. Oops, 60 and 1 to its neighbors, A and C. That would result in no change at A. And this will not happen, basically what was happening before, because if it's receiving this 60 from B, 60 plus 1 becomes 61, right? So at that point, you'll notice the distance vector for C has already converged to 50 and 1, right? And then this 50 and 1 gets sent to neighbors A and B, and then you'll notice this converges to 51 and 1, right? So you'll notice this one with the Poisson reverse in place, it only takes a couple of iterations, very similar to what happens when the link cost reduces, basically, right? So by avoiding these loops, essentially by this lying, that's why it's called Poisson reverse, because you're poisoning the distance vectors, basically. Right? So this allows the network to converge fairly quickly, right? Now, I know this can be a little tricky, so I would strongly encourage you go back, walk through this example as slowly as you can. If you have questions, of course, ask me now or ask me later on the forum, right? But this is one way to solve this problem. Now, mind you, it doesn't always solve the count to infinity problem. So let me show you a network where this actually doesn't work, and we'll leave it at that. So here, I'm not going to show you all the tables. We'll just focus on the costs to get to D in this case. So what we are going to just focus on is what are the advertisements sent by the nodes to destination D, right? So that will help us sort of, otherwise this gets, if I start showing you all the tables, it will get too messy here, right? So this is the initial network, 1111. All the links are of cost 1. So the path, notice B's cost to D is 1, right? So B advertises a cost of 1 to get to D to A. Similarly, B advertises a cost of 1 to get to D to A, right? That's fine because the path from B to A is this one, right? It's not using either A or C to get to D. So it can safely advertise this cost to both A and C. B advertises a cost of infinity to D because, of course, it's using D to get to D. So that's infinity. Now, what does A advertise, right? So when A receives this information, A will figure out its path to D is 2. Along that, 1 plus 1 is 2. Now, since A is using B to get to T, you'll notice that it doesn't reveal this path. So it advertises a cost of infinity to D when it sends the vector to B, right? So it's lied to B, basically, because it doesn't want to reveal this path. Otherwise, B will create a loop, right? However, it can advertise this path, the correct path, to C because A is not using C to get to D, right? So that's why it sends the correct advertisement to C, but it sends a false advertisement to B. C would do the same thing exactly because C's path to D is also this way. 1 plus 1 is 2. So C will not reveal this path to B. However, C is happy to reveal that path to A, right? Because it's not using A to get to D. Okay, now imagine that this cost changed. So initially it was 1, now it became 100, right? So B will detect that and B will start advertising a cost of 100 towards D, which it should rightly do. Now, what does A do, right? If you think about it, well, A has received this previous vector from C, and C had told A it can get to D with the cost of 2. Right? Now, of course, remember, A doesn't know how that path actually looks, right? So as you'll notice, this path is no longer valid, right? There's no actual path from C to D with the cost of 2 anymore because that was the old path. This link cost has changed from 1 to 100. So this path should actually be 101, right? But this is the old advertisement, right? So A thinks, hey, B is telling me it can get to D with a cost of 100, but C told me it can get to D with a cost of 2. My cost to C is 1, so 1 plus 2 is 3. So A somehow believes it has a path to D with a cost of 3, which again does not exist, right? But it then starts to advertise this towards D. When B receives this advertisement from A with a cost of 3, it will think, okay, A can somehow get to D with a cost of 3. My cost to A is 1, so 1 plus 3 is 4. So I have a cost to D with a cost of 4, which again is a invalid path, but that's what B thinks, and B starts advertising that everywhere. C will then say, hey, B told me its path cost to D is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5, and so on and so forth, right? So you kind of see the picture here that this will keep happening. And eventually, of course, eventually the nodes will converge to whatever the correct paths are, but it again creates that count to infinity problem. So here, despite using Poisson reverse, we still are encountering a count to infinity problem, right? So this is just to tell you that Poisson reverse does not always solve all count to infinity problems. Now you might wonder what does, right? So again, we'll stop here, but if you're interested, look up things like split horizon. There are certain other heuristics that can be used, which can potentially avoid some of these problems in these trickier topologies, right? So yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I think your brains will explode if I go over another heuristic, right? Any questions? This kind of diagram is better than the tables. Yeah, fair enough. But I think walking through that table once helps to explain those loops, right? So certainly for more complex topologies, I think this is better. I agree. Okay, so let's now conclude with a quick comparison of the two approaches. So we had looked at link state last lecture, distance vector this lecture. So there are various dimensions we could consider. So one is the message complexity, how much extra overheads are generated to exchange messages with each other. So with link state, we saw that you roughly need order of n square messages to propagate all that link state information to every other node. And then once the nodes build up the topology, they basically can centrally run the Dijkstra's, right? So to actually execute Dijkstra's, they are not exchanging messages. It's just that initial link state information propagation that generates those many messages, right? In distance vector, it's actually very hard to come up with a notation like this, right? Because it really depends on how long you're going to take to converge the actual topology, the costs. So it's very hard to come up with a close from expression like that. It can vary quite a bit. How long does the algorithm take to converge, right? So the implementation of link state I showed you was order of n square. There are efficient, you could do a n log n implementation, which will be a little more efficient. I don't know, my pen is a bit laggy. I'll not write it, but n log n can be achieved, right? It can still cause some oscillations, as we saw earlier, particularly if you're using dynamic link costs. If you're not using dynamic link costs, perhaps there's not so much oscillations. There can be some when the link costs change, but not as severe as with distance vector, right? So with distance vector, we saw that potentially you can have all sorts of loops. The conversion time can vary. We can have this count to infinity problem. And while Poisson reverse does help, it may not always help, and you may have to look at other heuristics, right? What about robustness? So what, for example, would happen if a router malfunctions and starts sending bad information, right? With link state, potentially you might be okay because remember in link state, the routers are only advertising links, the link state information, right? So that's only done initially. So you might have a scenario where a node sends out one wrong link cost or something like that. And then each node builds that global topology, and then they run the algorithm by themselves, right? So the actual execution of the algorithm is kind of managed independently at each node. You're not relying on information from another node to compute your costs other than the initial broadcast of that topology information, right? So again, it depends on specific examples, but generally with link state, the damage is a little less it's more contained. With distance vector, you can have all sorts of problems because in distance vector, each node is relying on the distance vector from its neighbors, and based on that, it computes its revised costs, and then it propagates this to its neighbors. So you're creating that dependency, right? So if in a particular scenario, you might have a long-lasting effect. So if you send out a bad distance vector, that can impact your neighbor's routes, and those can in turn impact that neighbor's routes, those neighbors. So essentially, you could potentially pollute the entire routing process by just sending one wrong distance vector, right? So the impact can be a little wide-reaching in distance vector. Okay, so we only looked at the algorithms. Of course, there are actual protocols that implement these algorithms where they'll sort of show you how this actually works in practice, the format of the messages, like how does a distance vector actually look like, how does the link state message look like, and various heuristics that are used. So this is something we'll not be looking at in this course. I'll just give you these names basically if you're interested. So a very popular version of link state routing that's often used is OSPF. With distance vector, we have something called RIP. There's a de facto inter-AS routing protocol called BGP that is strictly not distance vector. It's a variant of distance vector. It's what's called a path vector routing protocol, right? So that's one of the most widely used ones between autonomous systems, right? Within an autonomous system, typically, if you have a small network, you generally go with OSPF. If you have, because remember with link state, you're propagating all this information, right? So if you have very large networks, you can create a lot of overheads to propagate all the link state information. So typically link state routing is used for smaller networks. So within an AS, OSPF is a very popular choice for small networks. If the networks tend to be big, then one of these two are fairly commonly used within an autonomous system, RIP or IGRP. There's a question how to compute message complexity. So each node is here, right? So for distance vector, as I said, it's hard to come up with a notation. In link state, roughly each node is sending a message to every other node, right? If you think about it. So you're passing across roughly every other node. So n, that's essentially what's giving you that n squared, right? Each message is roughly propagated to every other node in the network. How do routers advertise the different types of costs? Can you clarify what you mean by do you mean in Poisson rivers when you say different types of costs? There is only one cost, right? There are, if you're talking of Poisson rivers, well, the distance vector that's sent is just changed, right? Where was that example? So here, as you saw, the node is sending a different distance vector to one neighbor, and it's sending a different distance vector to another neighbor. If I've misunderstood your question, you can. And the question is, in terms of congestion, costs would update more quickly than bandwidth. So as I already noted, it's not very typical to set costs as a function of network performance, because if you set very dynamic costs, right, you run into all these problems I was discussing. So while in theory, it might seem a nice thing to do to set the cost to be proportional to some measure of congestion. In practice, it's not very widely followed because it creates too much dynamism. And as we have seen, it can create all sorts of convergence problems in the network. So almost always costs will tend to be fairly static unless there's a genuine need to actively change them. Okay, so let's look at a few questions from your side. So could you answer this one? So the different protocols calculate cost with different metrics. Well, it depends. It's hard to say. And remember, the way the protocols work is within an autonomous system, you're only running one protocol, right? So it's not like you're running multiple protocols in parallel. So you're an autonomous system administrator, you decide to use OSPF, so your entire network uses OSPF, and you decide how to set the costs, and that's it, right? You have autonomy over that. The same would apply to BGP. If you're talking of inter AS routing, again, there would be a standard way to decide how to set the costs, and that's just followed by all the routers participating, right? So this is asking you, in link state routing, each node sends information of its direct links. That is basically the link state to which of these? All nodes in the network. Yes, that would be the correct answer, right? Remember, the link state is broadcast to every node. Every node needs to receive the link state from every other node in order to build that global topology. So the correct answer would be number 2. Let's go to the next one. So now it's asking you, in distance vector, each node shares its distance vector, I should say, correctly speaking, with whom? All immediate neighbors. Yes, that would be correct. The distance vector is only sent to the neighbors. And now the last one. There's a question here, how does a packet know to which AS to pass through to get to the end client? So that would depend on the route. So as your packet moves forward, right, they will be, each router will be indexing within its forwarding table. And as we saw, how the routers work is, you'll have a number of sort of entries in the forwarding table. It would look for the longest prefix match, and based on that, it's going to send it out on that outgoing link, right? So it's basically, at each router, there will be a forwarding decision made based on the forwarding table. And depending on how the networks are connected, this next hop may take you to one particular autonomous system versus another, and so on and so forth, right? So that's based on how the routes were actually advertised in the first place, right? So it's basically a mix of inter and intra AS routing protocols that are sort of populating those forwarding tables, if you think about it, right? because your packet is going across multiple autonomous systems. So what was this? Which of the following is true for distance vector? Okay. So it's asking if convergence delay depends on the topology and the link costs. Convergence delay depends only on the number of nodes and links. And it's saying whether in distance vector each node knows the entire topology. I mean, one subsumes two, right? So this answer is kind of irrelevant in that this is saying it depends on the topology, basically the number of nodes and links and the weights, right? So this is a subset of this. So the correct answer would be the first one in this case. Right? Yeah, of course, in distance vector, the node doesn't know the entire topology. Right? Okay, well done. Yep. Okay, so there's this bit about hierarchical routing, which won't be on the exam. If you're interested, you can read that up in the text. I'll briefly cover ICMP. There's not a lot to cover here, but I'll just revisit traceroute, given that we've used it, and show you how it is actually implemented using ICMP. But ICMP is a control message protocol. It is mainly used to report errors and for some controlled messaging between hosts and routers, right? So the most common use is, of course, error reporting, and then for applications like ping, for example, or traceroute, and so on and so forth. So ICMP actually runs on top of IP. So ICMP messages become the payload within IP datagrams, right? And typically, since ICMP messages are always sent in response to a router receiving some bad packet, or a packet that it's not supposed to, or a destination receiving a packet that it's not supposed to receive, what happens is the ICMP message will also include the first 8 bytes of the IP datagram payload that caused the error, right? So imagine a router receives a datagram. Let's say it's an erroneous packet. Maybe the time to live is 0, right? So the router has to drop it. So it now generates an ICMP message to the source of that message. And in that, it includes the first 8 bytes of the IP datagram payload. So that typically contains the TCP UDP port number and some of those additional headers within the actual payload. Now you might wonder, why does it do that? Well, when this message eventually reaches the source, right? So imagine, I don't know why the pen is laggy today. Yeah, imagine we have multiple routers, right? And imagine this router receives this message. There's some error, so it now sends back a ICMP message to the source. And in that, it included the first 8 bytes of this message. So when this source receives this, it can look inside these 8 bytes to sort of figure out what was the original message that was sent. So it can sort of reconcile this response that comes back, right? So that's the reason this is included there. So here you're seeing that this is the ICMP packet that goes and sits inside an ICMP header, and these are the first basically it includes the IP header of this message that created the error and the first 8 bytes of the payload. So this is the IP header of that original packet that caused the problem, and 8 bytes of the payload, which may also contain the TCP and UDP port numbers typically. So that allows the source to figure out which message actually caused this error. Right? In terms of the ICMP message itself, it's basically just some type and code fields. So there are various different types of ICMP message. Here is a subset. I'm not showing you all. So these are some of the common ones we may have seen, right? So for example, this one, right? So if a router receives a datagram with TTL expired, it would send back an ICMP message with that code, and it would include those header fields I talked about. If it received a packet that requires fragmentation, but for which the do not fragment flag was set, it will generate that type of error. If it's a ping message, it would send that one, and the ping response would be that type, right? What else? Destination network unreachable. So this is basically when it cannot be routed towards the destination, or it reaches the network and this actual node is not alive. That's the host unreachable, I guess. If your packet arrives at a destination, but there is no port that is open, right? So if you have sent a message to a server thinking it's listening on port 1000, but there's no actual program that's actively connected to port 1000 on that machine, it will generate that particular error, right? If there's some problem with the IP headers, the router will send back that header, and so on and so forth, right? So various types of these. So there's a question, are ICMP messages given any priority? No, they're not given any priority as such. They're just treated as any other messages. In fact, a lot of networks will actually disable some of the ICMP messages from being generated. You might have seen this in traceroute, right? You get all those stars basically where the routers stop responding. So that is one of those reasons that the network administrators have disabled ICMP replies from certain routers. Alex is saying, is it possible to fake the size of the information contained in packet headers? It is. I mean, you can potentially fake anything you want if you can have access to that low level functionality, right? If you're able to send out fake IP datagrams with fake headers and so on and so forth, it certainly is possible. But again, there's a lot of firewalls in place these days. So most networks will have some sort of firewall that's monitoring some of these header fields. And if they start noticing certain anomalies, if they start noticing suddenly a spike in the traffic, particularly if it's non-TCP traffic, right, UDP or just plain IP datagrams, then they can quickly filter those traffic, because TCP we know will throttle, right? If you start dropping TCP segments, the source will naturally throttle. But for UDP or just plain IP datagrams, you cannot throttle that traffic. So you can basically just start filtering those packets out, right? So yeah, most firewalls will be a bit more aggressive for non-TCP traffic because it's very hard to control otherwise, right? Okay, so let's go back to traceroute now and dig a little deeper. You've already used this, so you know how it works, right? You send 3 probes to each router. But what exactly is happening is the traceroute program is sending a series of UDP segments. So when you run traceroute x www x y dot whatever, you're basically sending a series of UDP segments to that particular IP address, right? Now, remember, when you're sending UDP segments, you need to choose a port number. So what traceroute does is it picks some random port number, which is unlikely to be actually open. So there's the likelihood of some program actually listening on that port number at the actual destination is going to be very low, right? And it keeps sending these segments and it keeps incrementing the TTL, right? So as we have seen, when the router receives a datagram, it first decrements the TTL by 1. If the TTL is 0, it sends this error message, basically basically saying the TTL has expired, right? And that message gets sent back, and that's how the delay is computed, right? When Traceroute sends out the probe, it starts a timer and it waits for that particular ICMP message to come back, right? And this message will also contain the IP address of the router, so we now know which router responded, right? Then the next one would be TTL2, 3. Now, eventually, assuming the firewall, like in many of your examples, you saw that the firewalls prevented your message from actually reaching the destination. But imagine in reality, if the message actually reached the destination, what would happen? Well, there's going to be no socket active, right? No one's listening on this port. So that final message will reach the destination, but there's going to be no one listening on that port. So that will generate this other type of ICMP message called port unreachable. And when that reaches the destination, it now knows I should stop because I've basically reached the destination. When it reaches the source, it would know that it's reached the destination. And then it stops sending these UDP segments at that point. Question, is the ICMP type message in its headers? Yes, that's correct. So if you look at the ICMP message format, there's a field for type and code basically in the header. Okay, so that concludes the network layer discussion really. So we spent quite a bit of time looking at IP, some general discussion about network layer, IP addressing, NAT, IPv6, briefly looked at tunneling. And then in the control plane, of course, we mainly looked at link state and distance vector and briefly covered ICMP. Right, so that concludes the network layer part. We still have a few minutes and I was expecting that. So I'm actually going to start looking at the link layer, unless there are any questions, of course. And then we can, okay. When packets are, there's a question, when packets are stopped blocked, is the information just dissipated as heat? Oh, that's an interesting, I mean, you're not, it's not dissipated as heat as such, right? Because remember the firewalls are working at a higher layer. So basically the firewall will pull out the packet. It's just that the router will not forward the packet anymore, right? So remember routers work on a store and forward principle, right? So the router receives a packet, does a lookup, and then it sends it out. If there's a firewall or some security mechanism running, it's going to inspect that packet, and based on the inspection, if it determines this packet should not be forwarded, it will not send it out again, right? So remember, you're transmitting data on one link, right? So you go link by link, basically. So once it reaches the other endpoint of the link, be it a router, be it a link layer switch, then that other endpoint has to make a decision whether it continues the transmission further. If not, you're basically stopped at that hop, right? You're going hop by hop, essentially. Okay, so my experience is not yet open. This was obviously meant for next week, so I'll remind you again next week. But now that we've covered the network layer, essentially we've been focused on at internet scale, right? We've been looking at networks, particularly in the network layer. We were focusing on sort of routers. We've kind of abstracted over how the end hosts are connected in a network, and that is precisely what we're going to do now. We're going to zoom inside what happens within a subnet, right? So our focus is now going to be entirely here, essentially, within a particular subnet, how the actual hosts are connected and so on and so forth, and how packets actually make their way across each link. So our goal really is to, of course, understand some basic principles about what the link layer can provide, what are the services it can provide. And there are actually a host of services link layers could potentially provide. Mind you, not all real link layers provide these services. So these could include error detection, correction, multiple access. We'll talk a bit about link layer addressing, and we'll also talk about Ethernets and switches, link layer switches essentially. So the plan is as follows, right? So we'll start off with some introductory stuff, look at error detection, correction, look at multiple access, then look at MAC addresses. Why do we need MAC addresses? How are MAC addresses learned? And then we'll look at Ethernet and switches. And finally, at the end of this discussion, we'll kind of take a step back and look at the entire protocol stack, because we've kind of been looking at one layer at a time. So now that we, with the link layer, we're pretty much covering all the layers we need to. So we'll take a step back and sort of look at what actually happens when you're executing a real network applications, and how these various protocols at all the layers coexist and work together, right? So that will be interesting. Okay, so the link layer is mainly responsible for transmitting the datagram, because remember the link layer, what sits inside a link layer packet, which is referred to as a frame, is the IP datagram. So the IP datagram becomes the payload for a link layer frame effectively, right? So the link layer is simply responsible for transmitting the datagram from one node to the next node, to basically along the adjacent link, right? So in the context of the link layer is pretty much implemented in every device, be it the end host, be it a router, be it a link layer switch, right? So there's no major difference as such from the perspective of the link layer, whether we refer to a host or we refer to a router. Everyone is effectively just a node in this case. And then this node is sort of connected to some communication channel, via which this node is connecting to the next node along the path, right? So that's referred to as the link. And there are, of course, different ways to structure networks. So we can have wired links. So these are these point-to-point links that you see here, something like this point-to-point link between the routers. We have wireless links. So these could be cellular, these could be Wi-Fi. And then we have what are referred to as local area networks. So that's what you see here, essentially a switched network, which we'll look at next week, right? And at layer 2, the packet is referred to as a frame. And this frame, as I noted, is encapsulating layer 3 datagram. So you may appreciate that when your packets are being sent, right, they're being sent across multiple hops, across multiple network devices, be it switches, be it routers. So on each hop, it may happen that a different link layer technology may be used, right? So for example, your packet on the first hop may be transmitted over Wi-Fi. On the next hop, it may be over Ethernet. On the next hop again, it may be on some other topology, other technology, right? And so on and so forth. So yeah, so that's essentially the beauty of the internet, right? That you can have these different kinds of networks all connected together, effectively using the IP as the glue. And mind you, it's not necessary that each of these link layer technologies, link layer protocol, is implementing the exact same service. So some services may vary, in fact, right? So it's very similar to like traveling, right? So this is a nice analogy. So if you're taking a trip from, say, one place to another, you might actually break up your journey into different segments, and you may use a different mode of transport on each segment, and each of those modes of transport will give you a different type of service, right? So yeah, basically, and for example, a plane, you get a meal, and it's a much longer journey or a little more restricted. On a train, you can move around a little more freely, and so on and so forth, right? So this is a nice way to think of a nice analogy, essentially, where you can think of yourself to be a datagram, this segment, this transport segment to be a link, and then the service given there could be the link layer protocol. And then, of course, the actual path is mapped by, say, a travel agent or an online travel agent, which is equivalent to a routing protocol. So in terms of the services, what services does the link layer provide? So the first one is actually referred to as framing. So this basically means it's actually creating the frame. So it's taking the datagram, adding certain header fields and trailer fields, so that when the receiver receives those sequence of bits, it knows what constitutes a frame. Because in the end, all of this is transmitted as ones and zeros on the actual cable, right? So when a receiver receives these ones and zeros, the receiver needs to know what is the starting point of the frame and what is the ending time of the ending point of the frame, right? So that's referred to as framing. The second service, which may be necessary if it's a shared medium, is what's referred to as channel access. So this is typically only needed when you have a broadcast medium, right? So mediums like this, for example, where multiple nodes could be transmitting at the same time, and that could create problems at the receiver. So rather than allow multiple nodes to transmit simultaneously, you want to sort of arbiter access to the channel, right? You might want to say, hey, you go first. Once you're done, let this node go, and so on and so forth, right? So this is what's referred to as channel access, and that is only relevant if it's a broadcast medium or a shared medium. And we'll look at some examples next week. Then, of course, we have the actual address, the link layer address, which I'll talk about, which is different from IP addresses. And we'll have that discussion on why we need both next week. Another service that could be potentially provided is reliable transfer, right? Now, how to implement this is something we've already seen, right? Sequence numbers, acknowledgements, timers, all of those concepts can be used. However, in most link layers, we do not implement reliability, particularly on link layers where the likelihood of errors are very low. So for example, on wired networks, wired Ethernet networks, we don't actually implement reliable delivery because the likelihood of errors is extremely low. On the other hand, on wireless networks, we do implement some reliable data transfer because the likelihood of errors on wireless links is higher, right? It's a broadcast medium. You could have all sorts of interference, right? So you might wonder, there's a bit of redundancy, right? Because TCP is already implementing reliable data transfer on an end-to-end basis. So then why should the link layer also implement reliability? Well, as noted here, you only do that when the likelihood of errors is high, right? Because if you are having too many errors on a link, then of course the end-to-end TCP will eventually react to that and retransmit. But wouldn't it be better if we could manage those errors directly on this link rather than on an end-to-end basis, right? Because it can take a lot of time for TCP to realize that there was a timeout or it's receiving these duplicate ACKs and then retransmit. Whereas if you're doing this on an individual link basis, the errors can be, you can respond back with a retransmission much quicker, right? So that's the reason that when link errors can be high, it is okay to sort of duplicate that functionality of reliable data transfer. Okay, I think we are running out of time, so maybe I'll stop here and then we can revisit this when we meet next. I'll just take a couple of questions here that have come up. Because of the different link types between hops, are there added processing delays at each hop? Well, it doesn't matter whether it's the same or different type, right? In the end, at each hop, you need to do a little bit of processing, right? So it doesn't really matter if the link layer here is different from the link layer there, because the way the packets move, particularly at a router, right? So packet comes in, the link layer 2 has to extract out the IP datagram, push it up, then the network functionality will execute whatever needs to be done and then push it down the protocol stack again. So whether or not you're using the same link layer doesn't matter at each hop, because it's kind of a fresh, you're starting from fresh at the start of each link, if you may. Does the IP datagram get re-encapsulated at each hop? Yes, exactly. That's the reason, right? So, and I have some pictures later when I expand on this. So basically, if the packet moves up the protocol stack to layer 3, then it gets pushed down again, right? So it gets re-encapsulated at each router. Not at each switch, but at each router, as we'll see later. Okay, so let's call it a day and have a great week. And I'll see you all on Monday. Bye.